On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about remote software monitoring. These are applications that allow you to do diagnostics, collect data, and also manage your systems. The importance of these, the ROI, and a lot more. All that on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Kramer, AV Beyond the Box.
A State of Control, Episode 37, Network Insurance.
This is A State of Control.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, programming, and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So we have a great show planned for you today, and this episode will focus on a valuable tool that's become an extension to AV systems and control systems, and that is monitoring software. And what we mean by that is we're talking about applications that can do everything from provide remote access to doing diagnostics and management of devices and systems, and as well as collecting data for decision making. We have a couple guests today that represent companies that provide these software tools, and we'll get to them. But first, I'm going to introduce my regular sidekick. His name, you guys all know, is Uncle Richie, Rich Fragoza. How are you today, Rich?
I'm doing good. Mellow West Coast summer greetings as I am in the middle of a family invasion. So I'm glad to be able to talk tech for a couple of minutes before I have to jump back into living the dream.
Excellent. Well, we're glad to have you. Next, I'm going to introduce Bill Tinnel from Utelligy. How are you today, Bill?
Hi, thanks. I'm doing really well. Thanks, Steve, for having me here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. And last but not least, Mike Maniscalco from IEG. How are you today, Mike?
Hey, Steve. I'm doing great. You got the name right. Both of them. So doing fantastic. Happy to be here as well.
I've been practicing. Thanks for joining us. So as I said at the top, system monitoring has been around for some time, but it's matured, and it can provide information and data and can be able to identify system faults and be able to provide diagnostics. But it's really become a lot more prevalent recently because of the amount of devices on a network and the amount of systems on a network, as well as the shrinking sizes of support staff. And so therefore, the need for some type of a tool has really come to the forefront. And for me, recently returning from Infocom, I saw a lot more of this type of talk and application demonstrated at the show. So, Rich, let's start with you. When we're talking about different monitoring software and solutions, where does the conversation go with the client, and how do we kind of lay the framework for them in terms of how to wrap their arms around this?
Really, the proposition that we use is just basic math. I think I was reading an article a couple of months ago that AT&T ran a survey and did a study that by 2020 there's going to be 40 billion connected IoT devices. It was just a ridiculous amount of devices, and every single one of them has a microprocessor and an IP address, and in some way is going to be communicating. And especially for us, we do a lot of remote work. We've been able to explain to people that, look, it's a lot easier rather than having a technician on site the entire time for a 5-minute change or something, or a programmer on site or a project manager, everything else. There's a lot more efficiencies in terms of cost when you can manage things remotely. And what we obviously talk about is that value proposition. And not only when you're performing the work, by having these internet-enabled devices and monitoring devices, but most importantly, it's the when something fails, not if. And we always have that conversation with electronics. we'd love to be able to say that we're going to have that 99.999% downtime, and some devices will have that. But a lot of devices, especially on our side, on the residential side, we're dealing with $99 and $49 devices. I mean, these are things that are not designed to be exactly robust. They're almost biodegradable in that sense. And what we found is that we've said, look, it's what's important is that we can diagnose these problems. We can spot these problems or any issues before you do, and eliminate that confusion and that frustration. We tried before using kind of like the insurance policy version of it. It's like you never want to use it until you need it, but that's not. It doesn't tend to be the right conversation people are looking for. It's not tangible. And our response has always been, these systems now have the ability, due to the tools and the third-party tools or built-in tools, to be self-healing, and in instances when they're not self-healing, that the problem can be addressed very, very quickly before they reach a frustration point. And there's a lot of value and enjoyment of the system and reliability and confidence in the system. And there's a lot to be said about confidence in the system. With it. So, I mean, to be honest, I mean, at this point, I am 100% all in. We will not deal with projects where we can't monitor what's going on for that reason, because it's inefficient and it does a disservice to the client. So this is a great show for this, because it's, I've been preaching from the mountaintop, banging my shoe on this one, saying, gotta have it, gotta have it, gotta have it.
So Mike, I'll kind of piggyback on this with you, and Rich talks a lot from the residential side, which I know IEG is very invested in. Are we talking about buying insurance for your systems when we're doing monitoring, or is there more to it than that?
I think there's definitely more to it. I think that everybody needs to recognize that there will be problems. I mean, even as Rich said, with the inexpensive devices, I've got a new smartphone, and it's not exactly inexpensive. It's $800, I think, retail pricing, right? But this new smartphone, 7 days in, has a health app that says, hey, we noticed you haven't rebooted your phone in 7 days. You might want to do that for better health. So even when we were talking about an $800 cutting edge smartphone, the consumer is actually recognizing now that these things need to be rebooted to be healthier and to perform better. And that's what it comes down to. It's more about performance, reliability, efficiency, not having to sit and wait for a technician to come out to your site. And there's so many other benefits outside of just the insurance side of the equation with remote monitoring. And, we've been doing it for over 7 years. We started AEG over 7 years ago, so we were early to the party. But it's great to hear Rich kind of reinforce a lot of the things we've been saying for all these years, and to it finally be to the point where people are saying this needs to be a standard in every single job, because it's got benefits to the dealer, it's got benefits to the end user, and even now it's got benefits to the manufacturer of the devices as well. So there's much more to the equation in my mind.
So Bill, Utiligy is more of a commercial application, and in the commercial world, there's been the IT. As we talk about AV and IT as being one, IT managers are used to having this type of a solution at their fingertips. So, is it a no-brainer to be able to talk to an organization in terms of what you can provide for them from a monitoring standpoint, and how does that discussion go as far as AV is concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. And we look at the history of these monitoring platforms, and when it started in IT, they were really bespoke type platforms. You look at what IBM had in place and what HP had in place. Those platforms, you had to do a lot of customization to get it to the place where they needed them to be, and it's morphed over time, and now you have platforms like Science Logic and Spiceworks and SolarWinds, and those platforms are so easy to deploy. You are measuring very specific data that's very important to CIOs, and CIOs are expecting this now in all parts of their sphere, and AV is just another part of their world. It's not, we've traditionally been kind of on the outskirts of their world. We are definitely in it now, and they want the same type of technology that they have in their other enterprise applications to monitor and maintain. And it goes back to the same points that both Richard and Mike brought up of, we want these rooms to be up simple to use, but when they go down, we want to beat the customer to finding that there's a problem in the room. And this makes total sense to CIOs. And as we continue this path, the financial crisis kind of created this world where we're moving away from facilities, and IT is really owning a lot of AV deployments today. And in that shift of things, CIOs are now owning these facility deployments. So they're owning the conference rooms as they get deployed, and they're very interested in, well, how do I charge back these other organizational groups that are using these spaces? And that is what our tools enable them to do. So not only can we make sure the rooms are up and if they go down, we can beat our customers to make sure that they're focused on their business and not the technology. But we're also enabling these IT managers and CIOs to say, all right, HR, you are using this room almost exclusively, therefore we're going to charge you for the support of that space. And that's super important and powerful. So it's both sides, keeping it up and running, and then looking how are people using it. And then there's ROI pieces in there as well. Are the technologies that were being deployed, are they being used? Are they being used in the way we thought they were going to be used? And that's what this data starts letting us ask those questions. Can we get the ROI that we thought that we were going to get out of these spaces? And if not, why? And then start coming up with answers to these questions based on what the data is telling us.
So I think that you hit on a good point, and I think data is a big part of this, and I think the collection of the data is one aspect of it, and that speaks to what needs to happen in terms of having the right devices that can provide you with that information and having those tools. What goes into making that into something that's presentable? That it's one thing to collect the data, but it's another thing to be able to make it into something that you can put in front of a CIO. Is that a component of a monitoring platform, or is that something that somebody does externally and separate from what you're describing?
Well, I know from our platform, we do both. So we collect data, we take that data and we put algorithms against it, and then we present the information in ways that we think are meaningful. And if you look at the start of where AV was monitoring, an easy win was projector lamp hours, and that was really the conversation 10 years ago. Hey, we can tell you when you can expect to need to change bulb. Well, it is meaningful, but it has on a scale of 1 to 10, that may be a meaningful level of 3. And so we needed to continue to innovate and create new value in the data that we're collecting. And so what we do is we have a number of KPIs, key performance indexes, that we are measuring. So every device is going to have a number of KPIs associated with it. And then we want to then correlate those indexes with something of value. So we're going to look at things like rooms scheduled and rooms used. Together, individually, those are important metrics that we may want to know. But when we combine them together, now they have an exponential amount of value to an organization. And we can keep doing those layered correlations and get some pretty interesting information sets that we can use to evaluate, is the technology being used, and how is it being used?
So we're not just talking about monitoring a system or a group of systems. We're talking about being able to kind of be the hub for things that are happening within an organization, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And so, we talk about AV a lot because obviously that's in our DNA, but we don't stop there anymore. I mean, we are monitoring route switch devices. We're monitoring wireless devices. We're monitoring building management systems. So we're no longer just interested in, is that display on or off? We want to know how that display being there is associated with all the rest of the technology in the space. and we're interested in what time of day things are being used, and all the different questions that you could be interested in a room. If I have chairs with monitoring in them, I'm monitoring chairs. That's I want as many data points as I possibly get, so that I can strip everything down to a minute and say, am I getting my return on investment in that minute of time? And that's what all this data does. And as we get more and more intelligent devices, and AV frankly needs some catching up to do. The devices themselves, while Richard had pointed out that in the commercial space, the IoT space, some of these things can be $65, $50, almost throwaway. In the commercial space, it's not like that, but that doesn't also mean that they're robust and they can handle, they're providing us a lot of information. And I think the devices in this space need to become more intelligent. Our designs need to recommend products that do have those enhanced capabilities, those reporting bits inside of them, so that we can get those data points to provide our customers the ability to really see what's going on in their environment.
So that's where I think it's really interesting, because when you start on the customer side of the conversation, our customers are very different and their requirements are very different on the residential versus commercial side, right? On the residential side, you're looking less at the CIOs and return on their investment in equipment and space being utilized and things along those lines, and more about health analytics information for the device manufacturers themselves. But the overlap is where you're talking about anything that's connected, we want to know about, and we want to know as much information as we can possibly get from that device. We also have the similar challenge where those devices aren't necessarily intelligent enough to report that information back today. We're seeing that change really, really quickly as manufacturers catch on to how's it impact their sales, because people are starting to specify equipment with intelligence, right? And this kind of insight, but also how can they utilize that information for their own support and their own product development initiatives and marketing initiatives. So that's driving things a little differently. And working with the manufacturers over the years, the challenge for a traditional AV manufacturer, which is different than the IT world, but for the traditional AV manufacturer, they're not as comfortable with the software side of things. So when you talk about remote monitoring and exposing this information via APIs, or you throw out acronyms like SNMP, a lot of that is foreign to their product team, to their engineering team, to their executive team that makes all these decisions. So one of the things we've done recently to address that is at ISC last year, we announced our device visibility protocol and device visibility service. And they're different, but there's a lot of overlap in them. But essentially the DVP, the protocol, allows a manufacturer to implement remote monitoring across all of their products with one lightweight, easy to use protocol that doesn't require them implementing an entire, say, SNMP stack. So they can embed this on an existing web server. And even though the devices aren't expensive, a lot of times they have that intelligence about their health and status internally. They just don't have any way to expose it to the outside world. So that's been a big improvement in us trying to help manufacturers move that visibility forward so that everybody can benefit. And I think there's a similar challenge on the commercial side of things.
So and I think that's a very interesting point, and now I'm going to hop over to Rich in a second from a programming standpoint. But a question that I have is how important is data on more of a residential or consumer side of things, and is that something that they're comfortable with, knowing that somebody's extracting data from their systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something we had to address in the early stages of the company in this whole monitoring concept, because people do take a pause and ask that question. So really the data we are focused on is data that's revolving around health and status and feature utilization on a very light level. We're not getting into what channels are being tuned to, or what types of services are connected to, what kind of streaming services they're listening to, what kind of genres they like. Those types of things we're not exposing. What we are looking at is, are they using Zone 3 on this receiver? And how often is that being utilized? Or how often is this device online or offline? How does that compare to other similar devices as far as online, offline availability? Firmware information, because that's a big deal in the insecure or secure world we're fighting for. Firmware oftentimes patches those updates. We're querying for firmware and whether there's an available update in a lot of cases. So those are the types of data points we're collecting. And we're doing it all obviously anonymously. That information is not being shared out as far as who the end user is. In most cases, we don't even know who the end user is.
I appreciate that. Good clarification. So Rich, so this conversation makes everything sound real easy, but you and I know from the standpoint of making all of this sing and being able to deal with different types of devices, programmer gets involved and has to get their hands dirty. How much onus is on a programmer to be able to really make monitoring achieve its true value?
I think it's integral for a programmer for a simple reason. There's the phrase that every programmer knows that they've repeated untold times in their careers. Well, it should be working. Right? I don't care if you're a single house, if you're a big programming house, if you're an integrator with a programming team, everybody's sitting in their lab, they're bench testing, they've got their controlled environment where they do these wonderful things and everything's set and, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Look how this switches and everything else. And then they go and deploy and the first call you get, XYZ. Well, it should be working. And so what we found for us, and surprisingly, it's helped our user experience tremendously. Because with with the remote diagnostics, not only are you getting the remote diagnostics and the monitoring, but you're also getting remote technical support and control, and secure. And that's a big thing. In the old days, you'd maybe poke holes in the firewall and you'd expose a unit out on the internet. Most of these devices now have their own built-in secure tunneling system. So if there is an issue, we're able to securely connect without having to cause any issues with the CIO or creating issues with the internal IT department, and say, no, we've got a point-to-point connection to these specific devices. We are strictly going in to look at them. And the beauty is to be able to either take control, or what we found when we're working with a technician or even with the end user, we'll go ahead and pull up a mirror application. And we can start finding out, is it user error? Is it a programming error, or is it a hardware failure, or is it somewhere in between where, again, like we said, is the firmware maybe a mismatch, out of date? And we've got a wealth of data available to us, and that's what we found, is that as a programmer, because the reality is that you're going to wind up being the proofreader, so to speak, of the AV system. It's your job to sit there and kind of make sure, did every period get in place? Did everything get nailed down properly? And so we found that, it's absolutely got to be used.
So from, I guess the idea that we're going to put in a monitoring solution, and, one is to be able to do that diagnostics and be able to provide that support. The other is trying to get things to communicate and be able to get the information that we need out of them. How much does the programmer come into play when it comes to really making that work, or is that something that is just device dependent?
I think in the same way that it's incumbent upon programmers to work with tech managers, to work with their integrators and with their partners. Again, technically speaking, programming falls into that. Well, we're just programming. No. We're the technology liaison. I mean, we really are. We're the ambassador between the hardware and the user experience. And I've said several times, I think that what we're concerned about is that there's that idea that we should be doing, we shouldn't be dealing with those issues. We're hired for one part. But the reality is to be proactive and to help everybody out. I think the onus is on the programmer, because they are, as somebody just buzzed in my ear, on my side, as a digital concierge, my job is to be able to not only deal with the problems, but hopefully provide the advice so that problems don't happen in the first place. And I really think that that's becoming the programmer's role more and more because of the sophistication of these software and hardware offerings.
And that makes your job as the digital concierge really difficult with the complexity in the systems today. I think that's one of the things that's really driven all of this remote support, remote monitoring, is the fact that everything is interdependent. Your content and your control can't be delivered without the Wi-Fi, which relies on a network infrastructure, an ISP, and a cloud service. and understanding where those breakdowns are and where the performance issues are without tools like this is nearly impossible these days. And that's what it's all about, is it's giving you that visibility to do your job more effectively. And it's another tool in your toolkit. It's like a carpenter needs a hammer, a programmer, a digital concierge, a technology integrator, they need a remote support platform these days. And that's just the way the world's changed with all this complexity.
I just read a report from Gartner that said that in 2016, 40% of IT technicians training involved getting better skills in monitoring platforms. So that just goes to that whole idea that this is becoming a very significant tool in their arsenal, and it goes to those points of how complex these deployments are being. And we get asked a lot, well, is our platform making the programmer irrelevant? And I say it can't be farther from the truth. You need to know more as a programmer than you ever did before. You need to have more languages under your belt. You need to be able to do not just, we are the last bastion that still uses RS-232. So not only do you have to know things that are moving forward, you've got to know these backwards technology that the rest of the IT world got rid of 2 decades ago. So things are evolving. You need to know how to do like JSON serializing. You need to know regex parsing. You need to know all the things that you used to know and all these new technologies on top of it, plus all the networking, all the security pieces. So your job got harder, and education is critical. And I can go into a diatribe on what, as an industry, we should be doing to help this group of individuals get more intelligent, have more tools and more pieces in their arsenal to be the people that we need to advance this even farther.
And yeah, exactly. And I'll say what Bill, just keying in on what Bill said, is that video over IP is going to cause a huge avalanche for the need for more support and diagnostics. We're just starting to, it's been around in the commercial and the enterprise arena, but that's starting to spike up. It's becoming accepted. We're now starting to see it in the residential arena in a way that we haven't before. And absolutely, I'm spending more time with managed switches and command line interface programming and things that, it was just like, I remember the days where I worried about the RS-232 cable, or, with 2 or 3 swapped, or did I worry about the polarity on an IR cable? But these are all of the things that are coming. And as these systems become more reliant for packets that are going back and forth, we have to be the ones, like Bill says, we're the last bastion in terms of making sure that we're vocal about about those packets meaning something to somebody somewhere, not for the sake of it, but because at some point there will be a problem. And for a client who's paid a significant amount of money, whatever that amount is, our feeling is always it's about having an answer. It may be at that moment, I don't know, but I can find out. And then we can pull that wealth of information, and we can pull from that database in there and say, okay, here's what occurred. But without anything to monitor, you're kind of shrugging your shoulders. And again, I view it as the professional responsibility of everybody in this industry at this point.
So I think that we've made a real good case for this from a support standpoint, from a user standpoint. Real quick before we wrap up, Mike, we'll start with you. What advice do you provide to people who are designing systems in order to really make best use of this type of an offering?
Yeah, I think there are several things you need to do. The first is you need to realize that a solid foundation is the start of everything. If you're building out systems on a network that isn't capable of handling the traffic and demands you're throwing at it, or the number of clients you're throwing at it, a monitoring system is going to do nothing but tell you constantly about all the problems you have on that system. So having a solid foundation is really key to everything. Once you have that solid foundation in place, you want to start specifying equipment that can give you more insights and more information. And then taking that information and understanding what to do with it. And Bill, you made a great point in education. This is a new skill set, and technology changes so quickly that it is a constant challenge for integrators and technicians and programmers to stay trained. So investing in that training is a key to success as well.
And I think you led me into my last question, and I'll throw it over to Bill. What type of training and education do AV professionals need in order to really make this stuff work?
Well, I've been saying it for about a decade now that things like CCNA have an extreme amount of value, but it's the actual hands-on that mean the most. So you can have as many certifications as you possibly want, but until you get your hands dirty, your value is only X. And as you actually play with the technology, it becomes so much more. But in terms of formal education, I'm all about things like the Cisco CNA. Get your security of the CCISP. Take a look at those certifications. Learn about VM. Get certified in VM. Everything is going virtualized. So the more you can have to support your customers and conversations, and that's what it really comes down to, is that we as an industry don't come off as educated to the CIOs. They question whether we really understand their world when we don't understand things like their VM environment. So we want to know the tools that our customers are deploying and be able to talk intelligently how our piece fits into their world. If you live in California, the state of California is paying for your training on advanced topics in software, in security, in networking, in data analytics, and I can't remember the name of the program. I'll send out an info to everybody else, but things like CBT Nuggets. These platforms can give you so many topics that can get you intelligent in these areas of networking and software that I think are going to be critical for us over the next 3 to 5 years.
And I will throw in, I think security is a perfect example of how quickly things are changing, and that if you're talking to a CIO or even a homeowner now, they expect you to be able to talk intelligently about security. So that's one of the courses we've invested some time in helping CETA develop for the trade show this year. A lot of that is hands-on work too, because you're right. It's not just getting a certification, it's getting your hands dirty and understanding it all. So agree with a lot of those points.
Excellent point, guys. I appreciate you sharing all this, and I'm sure that the audience will value it quite a bit. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. And I want to thank you guys for joining us and for being a part of this. This is an excellent conversation, and I think had a lot of valuable points. First, I'll thank Rich Fregosa for joining us. Thank you today, Rich. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about Fregosa Designs, and know what's going on in your world?
Well, obviously the best way to find me is either at fregosadesign.com, or you can find me on the Twitters at rfregosa. And obviously, type in my name in the interwebs. Every once in a while, something interesting pops up. You'll see us at CETA in a couple of months. We'll be reporting from the floor for AVNation, so it'll be a good time. And obviously, please check us out here and sometimes on Resi Week.
Great. And next, Mike Maniscalco from IEG. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate all you brought to the program today. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about your company?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you all. The best way to learn more about us, ihiji.com, IHIJI, for those of you who are wondering how in the world to spell that. Or you can find me on the Twitters as well, the Twitterverse at GTScalco or at IHG. Is the best way to find me in the world. We'll be at CETA at ISC and are on the road at regional trade shows doing education and things like this constantly. So I look forward to seeing you.
Great. Thank you. And last but not least, Bill Tinnel from Uteligy. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about Uteligy?
Yeah, thanks. It was great today. You can find us at uteligy.com, UTELOGY.com. I'm on the Twitterverse very limitedly, but Bill_AV, and we'll be at ISC as well as a number of regional events throughout the rest of the year.
Great. Thanks so much for all that you provided to the show today.
Thank you.
So my name's Steve Greenblatt. I've been your host. You can reach me on many social media outlets at Steve Greenblatt, pretty simply, or my company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net. But we do want to encourage you, most importantly, to visit the AVNation website, avnation.tv, to check out our underwriters, those that support the show and also support the organization, and check them out, and I'm sure they'll appreciate it. While you're there, visit some of the other shows. There's a weekly shows on the commercial and residential parts of the industry, as well as some show on marketing, AV and IT, and the Connected show on IoT. So those are a few that I listen to regularly and highly recommend. Also love to hear from the audience. Please leave us a comment, a review. Let us know you're out there. We want to hear some feedback on what we've been putting out there. So take the time to do that. We'd really appreciate it. So that's it for today. I appreciate all of the input from our guests, and we'll be in touch soon. This has been A State of Control.